This is Software Meets Business, a podcast sponsored by Head Channel.
Welcome to another episode of Software Meets Business. And with me today, I have Mark Roebuck, who is the founder of ProvePrivacy, if that's the way we're saying it today.
It is.
Welcome, Mark.
Well, thank you very much.
As always, I'd like to get started with just a bit of background. Can you give us a bit of an idea of how you ended up with ProvePrivacy?
Yeah, so I've spent many a year doing many different things. I've been self-employed project consultant for most of my life, most of my working life, mainly around organizational design and mainly around on the periphery of systems. I wouldn't really call myself an IT project manager or program manager. I was much more in the business area, but helping understand IT. I'm a geek. I'm a techie, but I'm also fairly good at talking to people. And so I kind of worked in that area. And as part of that, obviously, you get involved in lots of projects, which involves lots of data. And you develop systems as part of things and do business requirements and all of those kind of things. So that gave me a really good understanding of a number of things. It gave me an understanding of how organizations work, because I worked a lot around organizational design. One of the projects I worked on was to help Lloyds Banking Group separate TSB, and I built the TSB's property function for them. So you get an understanding of how organizational design works, how decisions are made within organizations, how data is used within organizations, and so on. And because I was contracting, because I was working on short contracts, contract came to an end around about the same time as GDPR came into force. And I decided that what I would do to enhance my abilities to get the next job is do some data protection training. It's really just strengthening what I already knew, but just get some data protection training. And literally within days of completing the training, I was being dragged kicking and screaming into helping organizations get ready for GDPR. So I became a data protection consultant partly by accident in some respects. It worked for me because I hadn't found another contract, so consulting worked really, really well for me. And I basically used lots of different things to enhance my knowledge and build my experience, and became, I think, a fairly good data protection consultant. Mainly because of the organizational design kind of things. I could go into an organization, understand how the organization works, and help them in terms of how do they manage the data. And I was consulting for a fair while, for a good 6-12 months or so, and leaving organizations behind with a tool set based around Microsoft Excel, Microsoft SharePoint, Microsoft Word, and so on, knowing full well that when I left, those tool sets would break down. You know, if they weren't already breaking down by the time I was leaving the organization. When you start to do investigations around where data is used in an organization, it's not long before Excel starts to collapse around you. You know, if you've got one activity which uses 2 or 3 different data sharing relationships, then you're starting to struggle recording that on one line of a record of processing activities, for example. So it's not long before Excel breaks down. You know full well that unless somebody builds an organizational structure around managing data protection, they're not going to update Excel after a while, and so on. So I realized that what I needed to do was develop a platform which would do everything that Excel was doing, but better. Any platform based around a database is going to give you the opportunity to reuse data you've already added, you know, have set drop-down lists, build workflows, all of those kind of things that Excel really can't do for you. And so I did that, thinking that there was no one else in the market doing it. I thought I got a fantastic idea and decided to develop the software. So that was really the start of it.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it came out of that frustration with, as in so many businesses have, which is everything ends up in spreadsheets, and then the spreadsheets start to become too unwieldy to manage because you haven't got that shared data across it. So that's really interesting. And so Prove sort of set out with a mission. You said there was no one else in the market at the time.
Well, I thought there wasn't.
Oh, right, okay.
I think one of the areas, as it turns out, it didn't harm me. But one of the areas I think I'd recommend other people to do when they've got an idea like that is actually start to go out to the market and really work out whether or not there is any competition in the market. I'd been in the industry for around about a year before I started to build this stuff, and nobody was coming to me saying there was something else out there. So it wasn't until I'd kind of committed myself into developing something and working out how I was going to market it that I actually started to work out that there were actually other players in the market. So, but it seemed obvious to me that if I'd not heard of it being in the industry, there probably weren't that many, and so that was kind of I guess the first mistake I made. Although I think realistically, if I'd have managed to do that market research, I'd have probably still come up with the same idea and still come up with the same plan.
Okay, well, we'll get into that in a bit and how that changed the product. So you came up with the idea. You wanted to build something that was outside of the spreadsheet, so you wanted to build a software platform. So what did you do next?
Well, I'd already developed a e-learning course, a data protection e-learning course that I was probably the first to market with that. I kind of recognized that needed to be done. So I'd already got somebody who I was working with who had helped me to build a website and promote this e-learning course through a platform called Moodle. And he was a bit of a Moodle developer, and I'd found him through Upwork, which is one of these find a contractor websites. So I'd already got the understanding that I could use Upwork, and I'd already got a developer I was using. So my initial idea was I'd build ProvePrivacy on the back of my WordPress website, and I'd get him to do it for me. And he was an Indian chap, a really nice chap. And when I first started talking to him about it, he was really good. He was really honest and just said, look, if you're going to build this on WordPress, it's not going to be long before you get into a point where WordPress is just not going to cope. You're not going to have the security, you're not going to have the robustness and all this sort of stuff. He says, if you're going to be serious about it, you need to probably think about building it in some other language of some kind. It was nice of him, but it kind of did him out of a job. Because the minute he said it kind of the light bulb came on, thinking, well, if I am going to spend money on developing something, and I do want it to compete, and I do want it to be, living a long time, it has to be robust. It has to be on a solid platform. It has to be something that people would, stand up to scrutiny when we go through the RFP process. So that led me to then kind of taking a step back and looking at other options.
Yeah, it's a very professional approach to very mature professional thing to say is that it's probably not going to work on WordPress though.
Yeah, and I think I worked out fairly quickly that it did need to be done properly, and so I looked at options in terms of how do we get it developed, and one of the things you have to look at when you're developing software is where are you going to get it developed? You have the most obvious thing for someone in the UK to think about is, we'll look for a software developer then, and we'll look for somebody we can talk to and who can understand our requirements, and we'll get it done right. And so
yeah, hear that a lot.
Yeah. So the most obvious thing for people to look at is let's look at somebody in the UK or let's look at somebody in the US. But because I'd already got relationships with somebody out in India, I knew what the costs were for hiring Indian resources. So when I first started looking at the UK resources, they were 3-4 times more expensive. And I figured that if I took on the role of product owner, if you like, in the process, then I could keep a handle on anybody or any language misinterpretations, those kind of things, and get the job done cheaper. Cheap was important because you're starting a new business, you've got no money coming in, I'd got no funders, I was doing it all out of money in the bank. So cheap was very important. And so I went back to Upwork again to look at the options there. So I ended up with 3 different companies who I were looking at, and I'd done this on purpose. I've been through RFP processes before with organisations, so I knew that the sensible thing to do would be to do it myself. Set myself a set of criteria, make sure that people could meet those criteria. And I ended up with 3 options. One was a UK company, one was a company out in Holland, and one was a company out in India. As I say, the UK company was coming in at 3 times more expensive than both the other 2 companies, so clearly couldn't afford it. And the other 2 companies were fairly small. And the reason why, there were 2 reasons really why I went for the Indian company. The Dutch company was, after interviewing them, it was quite clearly one young man who'd got a couple of developers who he knew, who would be doing all the development, and he'd be kind of the scrum master and kind of looking after it from above. And whilst I had a lot of confidence that he knew what he was doing and he would be able to develop the product right, I didn't have the confidence that he would be there in 12 months' time, 18 months' time, because it's just kind of too early in his journey and he'd not really got anything set out, and he was using resources who were quite clearly friends and so on, and they could just disappear. So the main reason why I picked the Indian company was because they were established. The other reason why I used them is because actually, when I was putting the stuff on Upwork, the guy who was the CEO of the Indian company was actually in the UK at the time and found my email address, went out of his way, found my email address, emailed me, and asked me if we could meet somewhere in London so that he could have a chat with me, which you could kind of take a step back and go, this is a little bit forward, but actually it really, really worked. We went and sat and had a coffee, got on really well, probably spent an hour and a half together talking about what was needed. And it just gave me all the assurances I needed, that it got, at the time, a small team of 7 or 8 developers. They were employed by him out in India. He spent most of his time in India, but came to the UK a lot, so I knew I could chat with him if I needed to. And I just got that confidence from them, really, that they were keen and that they were growing. And that was more important to me because you knew that if they were growing, obviously any firm can collapse. But if you knew that if they were growing, they would be there in 6 to 12 months' time and so on. So it felt a fair bet.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there anything else that you thought was really important, or that you maybe got from meeting him face to face?
The thing is Upwork's great, but it's that opportunity to meet somebody face to face, which actually gives you. It's like anything, isn't it? You look somebody in the eye, you start to get an understanding of the character and so on. And I just believed that he cared about what I was doing. At one point, he was talking about maybe helping me out in terms of money by taking a share in the business and those kind of things. So it just kind of, everything about him just kind of showed me that he wanted the business to succeed.
Yeah. So,
and to be honest, it's still the same now. They still charge me the same rate that they did when I first started with them, which was a kind of a cheaper rate than it is now, because they've grown now. They're now a 200-300 employee company. But because I was one of their first clients, they're still looking after me. So I made the right choice.
Yeah, you can't complain there. There.
Definitely not.
I just wondered if there was anything about the process of delivery, or they talked about that gave you some confidence.
Let me just interrupt this podcast for a few seconds. I just wanted to let you know about our wonderful sponsor, HeadChannel. HeadChannel builds software engineering teams, and they've been building software for clients since 2003. They have a very simple engagement model. Either they develop and run it, or they build it and you run it. They could also help with finding a fractional CTO if you need that support. You can find them at headchannel.co.uk. And now back to the podcast.
So, in terms of delivery, first thing when the development started, one of the first things they did was give me a dedicated Scrum Master. Again, Indian chap, really good lad. Got to know him very well. They definitely worked on making sure that they understood their client, they understood their requirements, and that they'd built a friendship and a relationship with them. At one point, they were coming over on some business development tour of the UK, and we all made sure that we met up, went to a football match, had a few drinks, as you do at football matches. And you just got that camaraderie going. So I met the Scrum Master, I met the lead architect, I met a number of people. It was just that real friendly relationship with them, and I think that really works because it builds confidence in what people are doing. It enables you to be able to be frank with people if they're not doing the job right, because you know them well enough. And there is a problem with which can't be ignored. There's a problem with Indian developers, and that is there is a language barrier. They might speak fairly perfect English, but accents often get in the way, especially when you're speaking to a developer or somebody who's not got that more customer interface. Accents get in the way. So they're explaining something to you, they explain it with kind of words in the wrong order and things like that. A bit of an accent, so you miss a word or you can't understand a word. And it's important to challenge when that happens, because what I found was that you can quite often get them developing something, they're explaining what they're developing, and then when it comes back, it's actually not what you wanted because they've just picked up something slightly wrong, slightly difficult. I'll give you an example of that. Is when we were building single sign-on into the product, it was important to me that we were using the client's Microsoft Azure server to provide the authentication, and the developer just didn't grasp it for about 2 or 3 weeks into the development. And when they came back with the first proof of concept, and I should have worked it out myself because they were asking me to sign up and create Azure accounts and things like that. When they came back with the first proof of concept, what they were doing were using our Microsoft Azure in order to be able to authenticate clients. So we would have had to put every client onto Microsoft Azure as well as onto our platform, and so on. And all that happened because of just 1 or 2 words in the way that they were describing things, and because I didn't challenge it when I couldn't quite understand it. You can let the trust build up a little bit too much sometimes, thinking don't understand, but they'll be okay, And that was the issue there. Now, so I didn't lose. It is easily done, and you've got to be careful to make sure that you understand what they're developing, especially in an agile development environment. Because with the old I'm an old guy. I used to do waterfall development years and years ago. With waterfall, you write everything down. It's got to be worded. Everybody signs it off. It takes an age, but we come out with a document which says this is what we want, and it's fairly black and white. But with agile, what you tend to do is small stories, which if you get something slightly wrong in them, you're not really sure that it's going to get developed properly, and so on. Or at least that's what I've found. So now the real thing is just make sure that the real important thing is if you are doing agile, just make sure that you are talking to them as a product owner at least once a week, understanding what it is they're developing, making sure that if they are coming back with something that you're not really clear on, you kind of get that clarity and you understand what it is, because you can go 2 or 3 weeks with somebody developing the wrong thing quite easily.
No, some good points there. So let's just talk about funding it, because you said you were sort of paying for it out of your own bank account. Did that go on forever, or did you?
No. Well, I started off. I've been fairly lucky in my career as a consultant and a program manager. You tend to earn fairly good money, and you basically work for your own company and pay yourself a salary. When I first started off working, the additional money that I earned over and above a normal wage just stayed in the company.
Mm-hmm.
And I just carried on taking a normal wage. That helps because when you're between contracts, you can still keep on taking your wage, but it also, builds up money within the company. And so when I first started off, I knew that I could use some of that money that I'd got saved to get the proof of concept off the ground. So I started off with one module, built one module out of my own funds, but I'd got lots of ideas for a bunch of other things. So I went around and found some funding, some grant funding through an organisation called PAPI, PAPI,
okay,
which was being promoted by the York University. It was specific to West Yorkshire. Had to be a West Yorkshire company. Had to be able to commit to employing one individual full time. And they basically would give you 40% funding up to £20,000. And so what I did really is I kind of let the cart lead the horse in some degrees. I know that I could get 20 grand's worth of funding if I spent 60. And so basically I thought all of these ideas I've got, I will basically try and get all of those done, or as many of those done as I could, as part of this funding. The issue you have with something like that, though, is they all have set criteria. So you have to deliver something. And the kind of things I had to deliver was innovation. I needed to prove some innovation, and I needed to commit to employing one FTE at the end of it all. And so the most complex part of that was writing the business case and proving innovation, really. I was lucky in that data protection was fairly new. Well, say fairly new. Data protection, GDPR, was kind of making it feel like data protection was fairly new. So there were no real systems out there, as I've already said. So developing a system of some kind was always going to be able to tick that innovation box. So I ended up with £18,000 grant. Spent nearly 50, I think it was, on the next batch of development. And 18 of that was paid by PAPI. So all very good.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. Was it a laborious process of filling out forms and?
It's a business case. So the business case was probably, if you know what you're doing, if you obviously program manager, I've written business cases before, so for me, it wasn't so much a challenge. It was really just a case of trying to make what I was doing simple enough for the people who were assessing it to understand. So you've got complexities around programming, you've got complexities about the regulation you're trying to change, you've got complexities around making people understand the benefits and so on. So it was really trying to get that in a simple way. It probably took me 2 or 3 weeks to get the business case written and approved. But obviously that wasn't 2 or 3 weeks solid work, but that was sharing information and so on. You also had to pull together a forecast. What I would say about any, and I probably need to say this quietly in case somebody comes and listens to this podcast and who's in funding, but what I would say about pretty much any forecast is they're made up, especially at the early stage of a process. They're all made up. You suggest to yourself how many sales you can make and how much you can get for those sales and so on. And when you actually get into the selling process, you find that you have to discount it, or you find that you might even get more for it, but you find that you have to discount, you find that you're not getting nowhere near as many sales as you thought you would do. You've not really accounted for the fact that you need to train somebody and you're not put that into your business case and so on. So a business case is fictitious at the really early stages. It's just got to be convincing, and it's just got to be something that you can evidence if you're asked, really.
Yeah, as if you thought everything through.
Yeah, well, we priced the product, and this was before we'd really been out to the market and really understood how much people would pay for it. And I think we priced the product really, really low, extremely low. And when we got to market, we actually found that people weren't interested because they thought it was too cheap. They thought there was something wrong with it. We were charging £1,200 a year, and our nearest competitor was charging 10 grand a year. And so there were people who were comparing us with them and going, well, if it's that much different, it can't be very good. And so we put the price up. So it's simple as that. You find that you can do things like that. So
yeah, it's interesting. So what is it that ProvePrivacy does? What are the kind of the core features of the platform?
So it's there to manage data protection compliance. So with the advent of GDPR and the Data Protection Act in 2018, there's a lot more accountability on organizations to evidence that they're compliant with the regulation. The old Data Protection Act, way back in 98 or whatever it was, the old Data Protection Act had a set of rules in place, and those didn't change fundamentally when GDPR came in. There was one additional principle added, which was that an organization needs to be accountable for its data protection. And that basically means that an organization has to evidence that they're compliant with the law. So before you could say, yeah, we're okay, we're trying our best, but now you've got to prove it if you're asked. And that's why we needed all of the spreadsheets and all of that sort of stuff, because you were trying to evidence that you'd put controls in place and so on. So what ProvePrivacy does is puts a number of different modules in front of you so that you can start to evidence compliance with the regulation. So the first one, and the one that most clients are interested in, is the record of processing activities module. What we do there is we understand what an organization is doing, what activities is taking place, what personal data it uses as part of those activities, and then what controls does it have in place around that personal data to make sure that it's compliant with regulation. So, for example, if you've got an activity which is, let's say, setting up a pension scheme, and as part of that you're sharing that data with a pension provider, we want to make sure that you've got all of the controls in place between you and the pension provider to make sure that that transaction is safe and it's contractually correct and you've got the right lawful reasons for sending it and all of those kind of things. And what the software will do as part of that is it will identify where there are gaps and then add them to the risk log so that the data protection officer can look at the risks and manage the risks. Where it really stands out, what everybody says to us is that it is simple to use. And that's its key selling point. It's been designed so that anybody in the organization can update it. So it's not been designed for data protection people. It's been designed for people who aren't data protection people. So that means the complexities of the regulation are programmed in. So that if you ask a question and you get a particular answer, the next set of questions are basically based on that answer. And it's got obviously help text in it and support, so that if you it kind of weaves its way through a decision tree and helps people to answer all the questions exactly and so on. And this is where the OD bit comes in, is because you are delegating that down into the business. That means that the people who are using the data and who are using those activities are the ones completing the system, the software. And because the system is then identifying the issues, the DPO doesn't have to do all of the understanding how everything works. They can just see what the issues are. And then they can help the people whose processes they are to fix those issues. And so that's what the ROPA does. It also has a data breach management system built in, a system to help manage things like data subject access requests and so on. Risk management, so where we identify risks, there's a risk management and risk control system in. Policy management, so we can put all companies' policies on there and make sure that they've been read and understood and reviewed and so on. And then we've also got a objectives and controls module, which is based around ISO 27001, and it allows organizations to say, how are they managing data in their organization? So which controls have they got in place? But also evidencing that they've got the data or the things in support of those controls. So for example, if an organization is saying that they're going to do something like network management and protecting the network, they would expect to put some controls in there, let's say, for example, penetration testing. And then attached to that control would be the evidence of the penetration testing. So that when it comes to certification to ISO 27001, they've got all the evidence in one place, and it's current because the system's reminding them when it expires and so on. So basically, we're trying to do everything we can to manage data protection across an organization.
Yeah. Okay. And you've ended up winning a few notable clients.
Yeah. Well, we didn't really know where to start when we first started out. I worked with a guy who knew public sector very well. And so we managed to get quite a few things within the public sector. We've got a number of different integrated care boards for the NHS. We've got some universities on there now. We've got a few global organisations on. So we've got a company called Navitas who is in the university sector, but they're a global organisation, and they essentially set up colleges in universities to help students to pathways into education, etc. They're a global organisation. We've won a company called Renishaw, which is a FTSE 250 engineering company. So you can see that you kind of, it's not just personal data heavy organisations. It's really anybody who's concerned about data and data protection in their organisation can use it. We've also got a number of life sciences organisations on as well. So one of which has only got about 15 employees. So you can see that you can scale the system from really small numbers of people right the way up to FTSE 250.
Yeah. It sounds like a very, very good tool. But what does the future hold? So obviously you've still got your development team. They're adding features. Have you got any big plans?
Well, the main focus at the moment is marketing and building out the product and selling the product. What you do find is when you've got anything like this is you can spend a heck of a lot of money on development. And if you haven't got that money, then obviously it's got to come from somewhere. So what we're trying to do now is just get the number of clients up so that we can start to build on the profit, and then with the profit, then we can start to build more functionality. In terms of roadmap, just stop me. I just talk too much about roadmap. There's a heck of a lot we can be doing. We've already got a way of capturing what information assets an organization is using. So, and that's quite important for a lot of organizations to know what systems they have.
Yeah. Surprisingly, they don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Now one of the benefits of the ROPA is that because you've got people in the business saying how they use data, and because they're saying, and we put it on this system, the ROPA is a fantastic way of identifying what systems you do have, because they're telling you all the time. So we're collecting that as part of the ROPA at the minute. I want to build that out now into a module which allows IT to add more value to that. So, for example, if you identify that you've got that data's being shared on Microsoft SharePoint, the IT person can go, well, SharePoint's on this server or in this server farm, and add more value. Or the SLA for Microsoft is this, the backup is this, and so on. So it kind of gives you more value for that side of things. The risk management, I want to grow out quite a lot now. I'm trying to build risk management into being something which is organizationally global rather than just data protection. And that would work and tie in very, very well with the controls piece, which I just discussed around ISO 27001. If we link those two together properly, they are linked, but if we can link those two together properly with an organizational view of it rather than the data protection view of it, then that's going to add a heck of a lot of value and give us new customers. We're not going to be talking to data protection people anymore. We're going to be talking to GRC people, company secretaries, risk functions, IT functions, and so on. So that really helps us as well.
Yeah, sounds like you've got a lot of plans. So I guess just kind of to round up, the lessons that you've learned from building some software, using a team, is there anything that you'd say to anyone who was looking to go on the same journey?
It's difficult. The things that I tend to regret most are things where I've had a great idea and developed something, and then it doesn't get used as much as I thought it would do. So you kind of take a step back and think it's not really added the value that you think it's going to add. I developed an e-learning platform as part of the software. It's great for current clients, but I spent quite a bit in development, making sure that it didn't have to be used by current clients, and it could be used by somebody who's not on the system. So I spent probably about 20% of the budget for that on making it globally available, only to find that nobody's really interested because there are so many other platforms out there that do it, and cheaply and probably better. So it's really trying to keep a focus on just developing what you need and kind of learning as you go along, and not. I suppose this is an argument for agile over waterfall. Developing what you can see the growth pattern being, and not going too far off piste is probably the thing I would say.
Yeah, I think there's an argument in that fixed price delivery probably initially as you build trust with the supplier, and then you switch to more of an agile way of delivering as you build out features, because you don't know what you don't know at that point. But,
yeah, absolutely.
So
I mean, fixed price. If you're going to go for things like grants, fixed price is essential, because you have to have. You've got to basically, when you're doing a grant or something, you've got to put 3 quotes forward, and so you've got to define what you want quite very clearly, and you've got to get all 3 organisations to give you a quote. So they're all going to say, nobody's going to commit to a quote without knowing what they're quoting for. So you have to go for that fixed price. You've got no choice. But once you're doing it yourself, just incremental development is probably the right way to go with it.
Yeah, as long as you've got the right team and you trust them, that all works.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, thanks, Mark, so much for your time. You've been a great guest on Software Meets Business. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Software Meets Business, the podcast sponsored by Head Channel. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and review on your preferred platform.